Okay, guys, we are going to just start digging right into Chapter 24, Section 2. This is where America joins World War I. We have now declared war on Germany. Therefore, we've declared war on all of Germany's allies, and now we are ready to start fighting. So, first thing we've kind of talked about already also is that the U.S. Army in 1917 is only about 200,000 troops. Now, this is not anywhere near enough to fight in this world war. In fact, most armies in this war have about 10 million troops, so we are way behind. So what we do is we try to get volunteers to join the Army. And here you see the famous recruitment poster, Uncle Sam, I want you, for the U.S. Army. Unfortunately, not enough volunteers came forward, so what we saw was this act of Congress, right? It's called the Selective Service Act, and anytime we hear the word act, you guys know it's an act of Congress. And what it meant is we are going to draft, the term draft comes about, we are going to draft basically American citizens. All men between the ages of 21 and 30 are basically pulled from their jobs, and they are given training, basic training. They're given a gun. They're given a standard government issue uniform, and they are sent overseas to Europe to fight the war. We go from 200,000, an army of 200,000, to 3 million because of the Selective Service Act. Now, this wasn't a very popular thing, right? Some people didn't want to fight, but we'll talk about ways to try to get people to agree with it through things called propaganda. We're going to talk about propaganda in class. You should know what propaganda is. If you don't know what that is, look back through our notes we're going to take in class on what propaganda is. So here are some examples of propaganda to get people to enlist in the Army. Again, they're trying to invoke a feeling, invoke an emotion, trying to get them to join. It's up to you, all this interesting things. And we looked at some of this stuff. We talked about this in class. We will talk about it, about propaganda and how it's effective and the different types of propaganda. But let me just move on for now. So when we send our troops over, what we create is something called the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. So all these troops that fought for the American Army were known as the AEF, the American Forces, basically. They were led by this guy, General John Pershing. And here is what's interesting is all this standard issue uniform with the campaign hat, the bayonet, the meat pouch can, right? This is all what the 3 million soldiers who were drafted would have looked like going off to World War I. Here are the U.S. troops in Europe. Again, we're involved in the war. Now we're fighting. This is an interesting identity card. Again, here, look, it says American Expeditionary Forces, or AEF. We're known as the American Forces. We're called the AEF. Here's their identity card. This is, an interesting artifact from World War I. So Woodrow Wilson, as Commander-in-Chief, right, he is the president during World War I, and as Commander-in-Chief, he is in charge of the armed forces, right? That's his role as president. He wanted the U.S. to fight separately, and this is really important. He did not want the American forces commanded by the Allies, and basically the reason is right here. He wanted the U.S. to be a hero. We wanted to stand alone. We wanted to do our fighting our way. And this way, at the end of the war, we can say, hey, look, we helped fight. Look what our forces did. And it's going to be something that helps us to get more recognition for yes, we did join the Allied powers. We did fight with them, but we weren't fighting under their command. We didn't let Great Britain command our forces. We commanded our own forces. Other countries in World War I, like India and other countries like that, they sent troops and just let Great Britain order their troops around. Okay, we did not do that. Back at home, it is very interesting. We have 3 million men who are overseas in Europe. We have a lot of women who now, join the fight as well. Either by taking, here you see like secretarial jobs. Here you would see different types of the armed forces, kind of as secretaries, or maybe a nurse, but even also back home as workers. And here's where we see women joining the workforce, right? They're taking the jobs that men left behind. All these men are now fighting. Who's working in the factories? Well, now it's women are going to take their place in the war, right? Here's more women making ammunition. Because of women's efforts, Again, think about the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. Because women were more involved in America now, right? Women, 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 right? Oh, where are all the men? The men are fighting. Well, now we see the 19th Amendment come about. Women say, we are important, right? And we get the right. They eventually are granted the right to vote, right? This is where the 19th Amendment comes into play. We talked about that previously. So a lot's kind of going on here. As we go through here, World War I, there's a lot of history we're kind of leaving out, but, you know, World War I, it could be a course in itself. But here's what kind of starts to happen. We know Russia was fighting Germany. Russians want out of the war. And basically, their king, right, the Russian king was known as the Tsar, is overthrown. The Russian people in the middle of World War I overthrow their own king. And they say, let's get out of World War I. We don't want to fight anymore. And what happens is there's this new guy by the name of Vladimir Lenin. And this guy, Vladimir Lenin, is convincing the Russian people that an empire with a king and a czar, they were called, and a ruler, is not the best course of action for the Russians. In fact, they should be under a different type of rule, under a socialistic system, right, more of a communistic system where everyone all shares everything together. And here's where we see, right in the middle of World War I, right, 1917, World War I is still happening. This is where we see the birth of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is born. Okay, here is Vladimir Lenin telling his people. Basically, they used a term, you know, peace, land, food. This is what he told the people. We want peace. Let's end World War I. We want land. Let's collectively share all our resources, right? Under communism, you collectively share everything. And we want food, okay? We want, you know, to be well off. And Vladimir Lenin, here he is saying that communism is the answer, right? That was what he said. And the Russian people bought into it. There was a revolution. Lo and behold, here's the Soviet Union, right? Communism. And this is going to have major implications for history for the next, 70 years, right? Until the Soviet Union in 1990 is disbanded and you know, Russia is no longer a communist country. But we'll talk more about the Soviet Union as we talk about World War II and as we kind of go through history as well. But here we see called the Union of Soviet Republics. This is the beginning of the Soviet Union right here in World War I. We looked at this chart once before. We were talking about capitalism, socialism, and communism. So again, communism is on the opposite side of capitalism. This is an extreme kind of movement. We'll talk about more of this in class. So going back to America in World War I, there's a lot of famous battles, you know, fought back and forth. But what's really a major battle is what was called the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. And over here in northern France, there was called the Argonne Forests. It was this densely populated forest area in here. And this was a big push by the Allies. And Germany, this whole time, remember they came across Belgium and invaded. They're trying to get to Paris. They're trying to get to the capital. And they fought 3 years. And over here we know about these trenches that developed over here and all these trenches and blah, blah, blah. In this Meuse-Argonne offensive, in one battle, the Allies were able to push the Germans all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way back. All of the land that Germany had gotten in 3 years of fighting, ever since World War I started, they lost like that. In this one battle, they got pushed all the way back. Germany lost all the lands they had gained, everything to that trench warfare, all that stuff. So for Germany, this is not a good thing. All right? It's a very famous battle. Again, it's called the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Here are American troops. There's a cemetery. You can see all of these white things here are all the people who died on those battlefields during those attacks. There was a great number of casualty loss. 26,000 U.S. soldiers alone were killed in that attack. And again, here is the cemetery, all right, in France. This is actually an American cemetery in France where that battle took place. Because then you have 26,000 dead bodies. What are you going to do with them? You got to bury them, so they buried them right near the battlefields. Some interesting things before we wrap up here. African American fighting units, they were segregated African American fighting units in World War One. One regiment in particular, the 369th Regiment, actually spent the most time fighting on ground out of any U.S. troops. Okay, these guys got there the soonest and stayed there the longest. In fact, they were awarded France's highest honor, what's called the Cross of War, or the Croix de Guerre. Okay, here you can see in this picture, these guys are wearing this high honor. All right, here it is. This is a picture of what it is. It's kind of like the Congressional Medal of Honor for the U.S. This is France's highest honor. They recognize these guys, France did, for their work. And what's interesting is, what awards did these guys get from the U.S.? Nothing. So it kind of goes back to that racism, discrimination thing that we're still wrestling with in our country. So we're going to see Germany's going to surrender. All right, reasons why Germany's going to surrender: that Meuse-Argonne offensive, where they lost all that land. Germany's navy mutinies. Basically, the navy stops obeying orders. Allied power, their allies, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, they drop out of the war. So Germany's basically left alone. And of course, there was that revolution. German's leader actually resigns as well. So what we see, right? The end of World War I. It was called Armistice Day. Armistice Day is the end of World War I. Why is it called Armistice Day? Well, if you look at the Latin word arma and the Latin word statium, arma means weapons, statium means stopping. So armistium or armistice means basically stop fighting. Interesting fact about this Armistice Day. It was November 11th. The armistice was signed at 11 o'clock in the morning. So that was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Kind of interesting. And World War I is over. Armistice signed, the end of the war. This is not only news in the United States, this is news globally around the world. This is a global celebration. People are, hooray, the war to end all wars is now over. This has been a long process. Again, this is a global celebration in the United States, all throughout Europe. All right, this is the end of World War I. It's called Armistice Day. Again, here's Great Britain. Here they're parading in the streets of England. Okay, you see the British flag there. Again, more celebrations. World War I is finally over. Every November 11th, we celebrate something called Veterans Day. Today, still to this day in America. November 11th, again, honors those veterans who fought in wars for us. Originally, November 11th commemorated World War I veterans. But after World War II happened, all right, we decided to change it so that World War I, Veterans Day doesn't honor just World War I veterans, but now it's going to honor all veterans who fight in wars. Here's the impact, guys, of World War I. Deaths. 8.5 million people die because of World War I. 21 million people are wounded because of World War I. If you look at the casualties, all right, if we had to draw like a half here, almost half of the casualties were civilian. Look at that. Half of about 4 million civilians die. Innocent people die during World War I, right? Because the battle takes place, in these territories. All right, the Allied forces make up 36% of the deaths. Essential powers about 22%. This is a lot of death. And here's something that's very important. You look at the military deaths. Okay, United States only 2%. Well, why did the United States only account for 2% of the Allied deaths? Because they joined the war late, right? They stayed out of it, so they didn't have to get a lot of deaths, right? Russia were 30% of the Allied deaths. France, 25%. You guys see kind of the rest here. What's interesting about Serbia's 8%, we'll talk about that later. I want you to look at the military deaths for the Central Powers. Who lost most of the deaths in the Central Powers? It's very apparent. Germany, 52%. Germany was basically the main enemy of World War I. And because Germany, you can see here, is the main enemy, Germany is going to take the most blame. Okay? Germany is going to get blamed for World War I. Right? Look at this. 52% deaths of the enemy were Germany. And we're going to talk about what this means next time. Okay, it's very important that you understand this. Thanks for checking this out. Okay, if you have to watch it again, it did go a little fast. You guys can